Novaterra burn. Admiral Joan Park stood frozen before the holographic display, his heart pounding as he watched again the grainy footage of humanity's most prosperous colony being annihilated in a single blinding moment. Novaterra had been a jewel among the stars, a thriving world built with the hopes of generations. Now, it was nothing but ash drifting through space. The cities, the schools, the parks, all gone. Over 3 billion souls, snuffed out like a candle. "Play the message again," he said, though the words caught in his throat. His voice was barely audible. The screen shifted. An alien appeared tall, angular, shimmering with iridescent scales. Its face was expressionless, its tone chillingly calm. "Humans are deemed too dangerous to expand further. This calling was merciful. Accept your place." The silence that followed was unbearable. Park could feel the weight of the room pressing in. Around him, the Earth Defense Council sat stunned, their faces a mixture of horror, disbelief, and rage. These weren't soldiers. They were leaders, scientists, planners, people who had dedicated their lives to building a better future for their kind. And now that future had been crushed beneath an alien bootheel. General Kim was the first to break the silence. "We need someone who understands what we're up against," she said quietly. "Someone who's lost everything." All eyes turned as the doors opened and Admiral Hannah Lee stepped into the room. She walked with the rigid posture of a career officer, but it was her eyes that told the real story. They were cold now, too cold. Controlled, yes, but behind that control was grief carved into her very soul. Her husband, June, a university professor. Her 2 daughters, Maya and Leela, all gone. They'd lived on Novaterra. That footage, she'd watched her world die in real time. Admiral Lee, the council president, said gently, "Earth needs you to lead our response." Hannah didn't hesitate. "I accept," as the others filtered out, murmuring to one another in low, shaken voices. Park remained. He approached her slowly, unsure of what to say. He had known Hannah for over 2 decades. They had trained together, fought together. He had been the best man at her wedding. And yet the woman standing in front of him now, this wasn't the friend he knew. She was something else entirely. "I'm sorry about June and the children," he said softly. She didn't respond. Her eyes were still fixed on the frozen image of the alien commander. "3 colonies," she said finally, her voice flat. 3 billion lives, and they call it mercy. Park exhaled, his shoulders heavy. The Shirkal contacted us again. They want an official surrender by the end of the week. And the council? They're split. Some want immediate retaliation. Others think we should fake surrender and buy time to rebuild. "And you?" she asked, finally turning to look at him. He hesitated. "I think we're outmatched. Their technology, it's centuries ahead of ours. They wiped out Novaterra, Proxima E, and New Su without losing a single ship." There it was again, that cold stillness in her gait. Not fear, not even anger, just calculation. Hannah walked over to the window, looking out over the sprawling Earth Defense Headquarters in Suwon. The complex had tripled in size over the last decade, as humanity expanded into the stars. Now, it looked small, exposed. "Weak. Show me everything we know about them," she said. That night, the lights in the command center never dimmed. Reports flooded in, analysis compiled, archives unlocked. Admiral Lee barely moved as she absorbed every scrap of intelligence on the Shirkal. They weren't just a species, they were a coalition of 7 alien empires dominating this sector of the galaxy, and they had been watching humanity for decades, studying, waiting. The attack on Novaterra hadn't been a declaration of war. It was a preemptive extermination, surgical, strategic, cold. A warning to Earth not to overstep its boundaries. And Earth, in their eyes, had already overstepped. At the 13th hour, a young officer, Lieutenant Bay, entered the room, cradling a datapad and 2 cups of coffee. He looked nervous. "There's something you need to see, Admiral." He pulled up a classified file. A Shurkal scout ship had been captured 3 years ago near Jupiter. The public never knew. The tech had been studied in secret ever since. "We've been reverse engineering their propulsion system," they explained. "We think we understand the basics, and there's more." The ship's databanks had revealed something chilling. The Shurkal had done this 5 times before. They had identified rising civilizations as threats, destroyed their colonies, and forced the survivors into submission. Within a generation, those species stopped expanding. Within 2, they were absorbed into the Shurkal coalition. "That's the pattern," Bay said quietly. "Strike hard, kill hope, then absorb what's left." Admiral Lee didn't speak for a long time. Then she looked up, her voice steady. "We are not going to accept our place." The weight of choice fell heavier than any enemy weapon. The Earth Defense Council reconvened the next morning. No longer stunned into silence, they now sat in tense clusters, voices low but urgent, faces hard. The raw grief from Nova Terra's destruction had settled into something sharper: fear, anger, and a bitter uncertainty about what came next. Earth had not just been attacked. It had been warned. 3 colonies gone, President Yang said quietly, his hands folded in front of him. Not a single alien casualty. That wasn't war. It was a message. General Kim nodded. A message meant to terrify, and it worked. At the far end of the table, Admiral Hannah Lee sat unmoving. She hadn't slept. She hadn't spoken since briefing the council on the Shurkal's methods, how they had wiped out other civilizations before, always beginning with a precise, overwhelming strike. The goal was never conquest, it was compliant. "They want us afraid," Lee said finally. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "Afraid enough to surrender before the next strike comes." A murmur rippled through the room. "We have 2 options," she continued. "We can fight them now and lose, or we can wait, build, and hit them when they least expect it." Defense Minister Sun leaned forward. "And how long would that take?" 3 years, Lee said. "Maybe 2 if we stretch everything to the edge." "That's madness," he snapped. "You want us to pretend to surrender? To lie to the galaxy while we gamble on a secret military buildup?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation, "because that's our only chance." Some counselors exchanged uneasy glances. Others looked inspired. But none spoke louder than the fear of extinction that still hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. "They think they know us," Lee said, standing slowly. "The Shurkal believe we're either brutes who lash out or cowards who bow down. But we'll be something else entirely, something they've never faced before. We'll let them think we've submitted, and while they watch us lower our heads, we'll be sharpening the blade behind our back." Admiral President Yang said cautiously, "What you're proposing, it's not just a military decision. It's psychological warfare, political theater on a planetary scale." Lee looked him in the eye. "That's exactly what it is." Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't shock, it was calculation. What if they could pull it off? What if Earth could feign compliance just long enough to build the unthinkable A-fleet powered by alien tech, fueled by vengeance, and crewed by people who had lost everything? One by one, hands rose in favor. The vote was close, but Operation Vengeance was approved. And with that, the greatest deception in human history began. The very next day, Earth broadcast its official response to the Shurkal. The transmission was formal, restrained, and carefully worded to please alien ears. Humanity accepted the Shurkal's terms. They would limit their territory. No new colonies would be established. Earth, they said, knew its place. On the surface, it was submission. Behind the scenes, it was the opening move of a war no one else could see. While alien emissaries smirked and retreated to their patrol routes, deep within the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, construction began in hollowed-out rock caverns lit by human ingenuity and rage. Publicly, military ships were decommissioned. Speeches about rebuilding from within aired daily. Space exploration budgets were slashed in full view of alien observers. News broadcasts mourned the loss of Nova Terra and vowed that Earth would never again overreach. The Shurkal bought it. Their ambassador, a sleek and self-satisfied figure named Vexter, addressed the United Nations himself. "Your submission pleases us," he announced. "The culling will not continue." Privately, Earth was seething. Every politician who stood behind a podium and spoke of peace had signed a second document behind closed doors pledging support for the silent war effort. Every scientist who claimed to be working on agricultural research was instead perfecting alien shielding or quantum engines in classified labs. Every general who handed over a sword in public now worked by starlight, drafting new battle doctrines. And at the center of it all stood Admiral Hannah Lee. She was everywhere reviewing ship designs, overseeing test simulations, selecting crew members. Her grief had crystallized into relentless purpose. She didn't sleep more than a few hours at a time. She didn't laugh. She barely spoke, except to give orders or demand progress. Engineers came to fear her visits, not because she was cruel, but because she was so fiercely determined to win that failure seemed unthinkable in her presence. In her quiet moments, she returned to the memorial for Nova Terra. 3 towering statues, one for each lost colony. She'd stand in the cold morning light, watching citizens lay flowers and candles, unaware of what was being built behind the stars. Soon, she would whisper to herself, "They'll see what happens when you mistake our silence for surrender." 3 years, she had told the council. But the truth was, she would have waited 10. The greatest fleet in human history was being built where no one could see it. Deep within the asteroid belt, buried beneath layers of rock and secrecy, humanity's true response to the Shirkal attack was taking shape. While the galaxy watched Earth lower its head in apparent surrender, an entirely different truth unfolded in the shadows. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about survival. Operation Vengeance had begun. Admiral Hannah Lee stepped out of the shuttle and into the heart of it all. Shipyard Delta, a hollowed-out asteroid humming with purpose. It was a city of steel and fire, populated by the best minds humanity had to offer. Every corridor echoed with the sound of work. Welders sparked in zero gravity. Engineers shouted specs. Scientists hovered over quantum coils that no textbook had ever mentioned. Chief Engineer Day was the first to greet her. His face was streaked with grime, his uniform half-zipped. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week and probably hadn't. "We're building 10 Vengeance-class destroyers simultaneously," he said as he led her down the catwalk. "Based on Shirkal propulsion tech, but adapted, improved." Lee raised an eyebrow. "Improved how?" Day gestured to a towering projection displaying engine schematics. "Their tech relies on quantum manipulation for instantaneous movement, but their methods are static, built on safe iterations. Once we cracked the fundamentals, we realized they've been using the same systems for centuries. They stopped innovating. We haven't." Above them, suspended in dry dock, the skeletal frame of the first destroyer loomed easily twice the size of any previous Earth vessel. Its design was angular and efficient, blending human engineering with alien concepts. It was terrifying and beautiful. "Will it be enough?" she asked. Dodd didn't hesitate. "They won't know what hit them." For the next year, work continued at an unforgiving pace. The shipyards operated around the clock in rotating shifts. Supplies were ferried in through disguised mining ships, each one packed with raw materials, equipment, and carefully selected personnel. No one came here by accident. Every engineer, every welder, every technician had lost someone in the attacks on Nova Terra, Proxima E, or New Su. They didn't need speeches. They understood why they were here. Back on Earth, the performance was flawless. News channels ran endless reports about Earth's newfound humility. Politicians made grand gestures of peace. Old warships were publicly dismantled with much fanfare. Cameras rolled as military satellites were decommissioned and exploration budgets were cut. The Shirkal watched with smug satisfaction, convinced their warning had been heeded. They didn't know that the most advanced war fleet in human history was growing in the dark faster than even Admiral Lee had hoped. In orbit around Saturn, another secret facility thrived in the icy shadow. There, Dr. Minhee Kang was developing weapons no alien had ever imagined. They rely on gravitational field manipulation to stabilize their shields, she explained during one of Lee's visits. But we found a way to invert the polarity. Watch. A prototype beam fired across the testing chamber, aimed at a simulated Shurikal shield. Instead of being blocked, the energy curved around it and struck from behind. They'll fire at us, Kang said, and destroy themselves in the process. Lee gave a small nod. Install it on every ship. Throughout the solar system, hidden pockets of genius came alive. Physicists on Europa refined quantum displacement drives that could bring entire fleets across vast distances in an instant. Tactical AIs were trained to adapt mid-battle, learning in real time. Medical officers quietly prepared trauma protocols for a scale of conflict Earth had never seen. All of it moved under Hannah Lee's relentless eye. She rarely left the command deck of the Retribution, the flagship still under construction above Ceres. As its hull took shape, she met with commanders, engineers, and trainers. Every choice was deliberate. Every officer selected had a personal reason to fight. Every system installed had a purpose. No one had the luxury of doubt. By the end of the second year, over half the fleet was operational. 20 Vengeance-class destroyers, 50 smaller attack cruisers, over 100 advanced fighters. All armed with weapons built specifically to counter Shurikal technology, all equipped with quantum drives that would allow for unprecedented mobility, all crewed by volunteers who had spent the past 2 years preparing for war. They trained in deep space, behind Neptune's magnetic shadows. Simulations pushed them past exhaustion. Tactics were refined and rewritten. Coordinated jumps were practiced in dead zones where no scanner could reach. Everything had to be perfect. One mistake, and the illusion would shatter. But the illusion held. The Shurikal grew comfortable, even complacent. Patrols around Earth thinned. Observation posts grew quiet. Their ambassador, Vexter, continued his arrogant rounds through the United Nations building, utterly convinced of human submission. Lee even shook his hand once, just to look him in the eyes and remember his faith. On the second anniversary of Novaterra's fall, Lee visited the memorial in Suwon. She stood beneath the statues of the lost colonies as the wind stirred the edges of her coat. Around her, thousands had gathered to mourn, to grieve, to remember. She said nothing, but as she looked up at the stone carving of a mother holding her child faces, she'd seen reflected in her own family, her thoughts burned with the same promise she had made on the first day. We are not beaten. We are becoming. We are becoming. The countdown had begun, and when the time came, she would lead the fleet of vengeance into the heart of Shurikal space, not for revenge, but for the right to exist on their own terms. They thought we were finished. Captain Jinquan of the Shurikal Border Patrol leaned back in his command chair, eyes half-lidded, the silence of space lulling him into complacency. For over 2 standard cycles, there had been nothing, no movement from Earth, no resistance, no hint of rebellion. Just what they'd expected, just what always happened after a culling. Then the alert blared. Unusual energy readings detected in Sector 7, his science officer reported, voice tight. Jinquan straightened. Show me. The view screen showed empty space. Black, cold, quiet, except the readings didn't lie. The energy signatures were spiking fast and high, forming patterns they had never seen before. He opened his mouth to give an order. Space tore open. There's no other way to describe it. Hundreds of glowing fractures ripped across the void, each one pulsing like a fresh wound in the cosmos. And through them, ships, human ships. But not the kind the Shurikal had cataloged and dismissed. These were massive, sleek, angular beasts of alloy and vengeance, larger than any known human vessel. The lead ship alone, dark and glimmering, bore a single word across its side in human script: vengeance. Jinquan had no time to react before the first beam struck. It moved with impossible precision, slicing through one of his patrol ships like paper. Another beam arced toward a second vessel, bypassed its shields entirely, then curved back, hitting it from behind. The weapons weren't just powerful. They were familiar, and that was the terrifying part. They're turning our own tech against us, someone shouted. Jin Quan opened a channel to High Command. "We're under attack. Human vessels in Shurkal space." His voice cut off as another explosion lit up the screen. All across the sector, Shurkal patrols were being shredded. On the Retribution, Admiral Hannah Lee watched the battle unfold from the bridge. Her posture was calm, almost cold. Around her, the crew moved with silent focus. Many had tears in their eyes, but not from fear, from memory. "Enemy fleet at 90% destruction," her tactical officer reported. "Their weapons can't touch us." "Expected," she said. The quantum displacement drive had delivered the entire Vengeance fleet into Shurkal space without warning. Their shields, powered by Dr. Kang's gravitational inverters, were reflecting enemy fire back on the attackers. Every contingency had been prepared, every variable accounted for. "Commander Su," Lee said, turning to her second in command, "send the second fleet to Proxima Centauri. We take back what's ours." Across Shurkal space, chaos bloomed. Vexter, the Shurkal ambassador to Earth, had only just returned home when the first reports hit the High Council chamber. He listened in disbelief as sector after sector reported sudden human appearances, ships emerging without warning, attacking military targets with surgical precision, and then disappearing again. "They said the humans were subdued," one council member shrieked. "They lied," Vexter whispered, horrified. On the bridge of the Second Fleet's flagship, Captain Minute confirmed their arrival at Proxima Centauri. Once a thriving human colony, now it had become a fortified Shurkal military outpost, human memories buried under alien steel. "Admiral, we've surrounded the planet," Minute reported. "The enemy defense grid is active." Lee's face didn't change. "Target only military installations." "Begin the attack." Beams of searing light lit up the orbital battlefield. Platforms exploded. Enemy ships were vaporized before they could finish locking weapons. The Vengeance fleet moved with terrifying speed, vanishing and reappearing mid-battle thanks to their quantum drives. Within an hour, the Shurkal presence at Proxima was gone. Lee stared at the planet's surface on the main screen. "Send ground teams. I want every file they have. Locations, command structures, secrets. Everything." News of the battle spread like wildfire. Within days, half a dozen key Shurkal installations had been destroyed. Human ships were everywhere, striking fast, disappearing just as quickly. Entire systems fell before the Shurkal could mount a defense. In the Shurkal capital, panic reigned. High Commander Vexer, who had once ordered the culling of Novatera with the arrogance of a god, now watched in silence as his military dissolved in real time. "How did they build this?" he demanded. "How did they hide it from us?" No one had an answer. They had underestimated Earth, underestimated grief, underestimated the one thing no empire, no matter how ancient, could prepare for: determination. Back aboard the Retribution, Admiral Lee received a message from Shurkal High Command. They wanted to negotiate. She didn't even blink. No response. This was not a war for territory. This was a reckoning. And it wasn't finished yet. By the end of the third day, 80% of the Shurkal military infrastructure had been destroyed. The Vengeance fleet had taken back every former human colony, liberated countless systems, and reduced the galactic superpower to stunned disbelief. And they weren't done. Lee stood alone in her quarters later that night, staring at a small hologram of her family. Her husband, her daughters, smiling in front of the purple sky of Novatera. "You were right," she whispered. "They thought we'd break, that we'd forget, that we'd fall in line." She looked out the viewport, where hundreds of human ships floated in quiet formation. They were wrong. The end didn't come with a roar. It came with silence. The Vengeance fleet had done the impossible. In just 3 days, they dismantled a centuries-old galactic empire's military backbone. Shurkal installations, once thought untouchable, lay in ruins. Proxima Centauri was back in human hands. Every colony they had destroyed was now being reclaimed, brick by brick, memory by memory, but Admiral Hannah Lee knew it wasn't over. Not yet. From the command deck of the Retribution, she watched the final phase unfold. Every screen pulsed with data. Orbital positions, quantum drive cycles, fuel reserves, weapon readiness. Her officers moved quickly, silently. They knew what this moment meant. What it would decide. Admiral Commander Sue said from her station, "We've surrounded the Shirkal homeworld. Their last fleet is in defensive formation." Lee stared at the blue-green planet below, a world not unlike Earth, teeming with life. Children, families. A civilization once so certain of its place in the galaxy that it believed it had the right to erase others. "Do not target civilian zones," she said firmly. "Only military installations. Precision strikes." Sue turned, brows furrowed. "They didn't show us mercy. They killed billions." "I remember," Lee said, voice steady. "But if we become like them, then all of this meant nothing." The first wave launched. Across orbit, Earth's ships fired in perfect coordination. Massive beams tore through orbital defense grids. Government complexes, communication hubs, and weapons caches vaporized in seconds. But cities crowded residential zones. Schools, hospitals remained untouched. In the Shirkal command bunker deep beneath the capital, Supreme Commander Vexar watched in stunned disbelief. "They could wipe us out," he muttered, scales twitching with fear. "Why aren't they?" His aides had no answers. The tactical display made it clear. The humans were holding back. Not because they were weak, but because they had made a choice. That was more terrifying than annihilation. A communication officer approached, trembling. "Sir, transmission from the human flagship." Vexar hesitated before accepting. The screen lit up, and Admiral Hannah Lee's face appeared calm, unreadable. "Your military is finished. You have one opportunity to surrender unconditionally. We will not target your cities, but we will dismantle your government if we must. The choice is yours." The message ended. No threats, no posturing, just cold truth. Vexar looked around the bunker. Every officer bore the same look: defeat. The high and mighty Shirkal Empire, once feared across the stars, had been brought to its knees by the very species it sought to crush. "Send our surrender," he said quietly. Back on the Retribution, Lee received the message with a nod. "Commander Sue, prepare a landing party. We'll deliver the terms in person." 2 hours later, the shuttle touched down in the Shirkal capital. The once proud city was quiet. Streets deserted. Government buildings smoldered. As Lee stepped onto alien soil, she was flanked by officers in black combat armor bearing the insignia of Earth's rebirth. Inside the Grand Hall, Supreme Commander Vexar and the surviving Shirkal leaders stood waiting. They had shed their ornate robes for plain garments. Their posture was low, subdued. Lee didn't offer pleasantries. "Here are our terms: complete demilitarization, dissolution of your current government, reparations to Earth, immediate release of all species subjugated under your rule." Vexar's translator clicked out the terms, each syllable like a nail in a coffin. "If we refuse?" he asked. "There is no refusal," Lee said. "This is not a negotiation. It's the cost of your actions." He bowed his head and signed. Across the galaxy, the repercussions rippled outward. Formerly oppressed species began rising up. Inspired by humanity's defiance, they overthrew local Shirkal rulers. Generations of silence ended in a single week. The coalition fractured. But peace didn't come easy. One final report arrived. "Admiral," Lieutenant Day said, stepping onto the bridge, "we've detected an energy spike near Proxima Centauri. A Shirkal dreadnought is powering up weapons. They're targeting the human settlement." Lee's expression hardened. "Who's in command?" "Admiral Kecker, the one who led the original attack on Novaterra. He refuses to stand down." Lee didn't hesitate. "Captain Minute," she said into her comms, "destroyed that ship. No survivors." Moments later, the dreadnought was reduced to debris. No more warnings, no more mercy. With that, the final Shirkal warship fell. Their military was gone. Admiral Lee gathered the remaining Shirkal leadership one last time. "You now face a choice: evolve or vanish." Earth won't destroy you, but we will never allow you to rule over others again." Then she left them there, surrounded by their ruins. A year passed. Novaterra, once a graveyard, bloomed again. The city of New Hope rose from its ashes. Earth had not only survived, it had defined a new place among the stars. A new galactic concordat formed, a council of 12 species built on mutual respect rather than dominance. At the signing ceremony, Admiral Hannah Lee stood beneath a rebuilt sky, dressed not in battle gear, but in a formal uniform heavy with medals she never asked for. The Shirkal's new representative, Vexel, stood beside her. Younger, humble, reformed. "You could have wiped us out," he said quietly, "but you didn't." "Why?" Lee looked to the memorial garden, where children of all species played together. "Because strength without wisdom is just cruelty. And vengeance without restraint isn't justice. It's just another war." He bowed his head. She looked up at the star. Somewhere above, the Vengeance remained in silent orbit. It would never fight again, but it would always be there, a reminder. To the galaxy, to Earth, to herself. That when humanity had the power to destroy, they chose to build instead. The war was over. But the future was just beginning. 1 year after the fall of the Shirkal, Admiral Hannah Lee stood once more beneath Novaterra's sky, though it wasn't the same one she remembered. The air was thinner now, the soil still healing. But above the newly rebuilt city of New Hope, the sky had returned to its soft purple hue, as if the world itself was learning to breathe again. Children laughed in the memorial garden outside the Galactic Concordat headquarters. Not just human children, there were others too. Willowkin from Alpha Centauri, the crystalline Tevrons. Even a few young Shirkal, their iridescent scales still bright with youth, chasing each other under the open sky. It was a sight Hannah never thought she'd live to see. Inside, the hall was filled with representatives from 12 species survivors, former subjugates, and even former enemies. Their clothing was different, their languages varied, but they shared something rare across the stars: hope. President Yang of Earth stood at the central podium. "Today marks more than a treaty," he said. "It marks a promise that power will no longer determine worth, that strength will not be used to suppress, but to protect, that the stars will be home to all who seek peace." Applause filled the chamber. Hannah watched silently as the Treaty of Novaterra was passed from one hand to the next. Vexel, the new leader of the Shirkal, signed without hesitation. His eyes no longer held the arrogance of his predecessors. They held understanding, a quiet gratitude, and perhaps a bit of guilt. Next came Earth's representative, Diplomat June, who had guided the difficult conversations with precision and grace. As he signed the treaty, Hannah felt the tightness in her chest begin to loosen. They had done it. Outside, her aide Sinho approached with a data pad. "Admiral, the final decommissioning report for the Vengeance-class fleet is ready." "All of them?" she asked, not looking up. "Except one," he said after a pause. "The original Vengeance, still fully operational. Concordat approved its preservation as a symbolic defense platform." She nodded. "Good. We'll need a reminder." Sinho hesitated. "A reminder to our enemies?" "To ourselves," she said, "of what we're capable of when we're angry, and when we're wise." Later that evening, the reception spilled into the plaza. Food from different worlds was served. Musicians from Earth and distant systems played songs of survival. Hannah moved quietly through the crowd, accepting nods and thanks with modest grace. She was a symbol now, a hero. But she had never fought for glory. "Admiral Lee," a voice called warmly. She turned to see Chief Engineer Taiwan, older now, but still sharp-eyed. He led her to a wide viewing window facing the orbital dock. A new ship was taking shape. "This is the Explorer," he said, pride in every word. "The first of its kind, built not for war, but for discovery." Its silhouette was sleek, elegant, smaller than the Vengeance, but no less powerful in presence. This was what came next, a vessel meant to push outward, to connect, to understand. "It's beautiful," Hannah said softly. Tawan nodded. "It uses a modified quantum displacement drive. More stable, less fuel-intensive. With it, we can explore beyond the mapped galaxy. Whole systems we've never touched." She smiled faintly. "A better mission than the one we just completed." As the stars turned overhead, Hannah found herself in quiet conversation with Vexol, the Shurkal leader. He had requested the meeting himself alone, without aides or translators, a show of humility she hadn't expected. "My people have much to learn," he said. "We ruled through fear. You responded with mercy. That changed us." She said nothing at first. Then, humanity had to learn that lesson the hard way too. More than once. "You could have destroyed us." "We nearly did," she admitted. "But then what? We'd be conquerors, just like you were." Vexel looked at her carefully. "I never thought I would say this, but I'm glad you didn't." Before he left, he turned back to her. "You've changed how we view your kind, and how we see ourselves." That night, Hannah returned to the memorial garden alone. The wind carried a faint floral scent from plants brought in from across the galaxy, each one representing a species once under the Shurkal's rule. In the center stood a statue of a human family, generic and symbolic, but to Hannah, it was her husband and daughters. Always would be. "We did it," she whispered. "We didn't just survive, we became something better." Her comms device beeped. "Admiral," said the voice of the explorer's captain, "we've received a contact ping from beyond former Shurkal territory. A group of traders, unknown species, requesting diplomatic contact." She smiled. "Send the welcome signal." Concorded protocols. The next morning, she stood with President Yang in the Counterattack Council. Plans for future expeditions were on the table. Trade, language exchange, scientific missions. There was so much to do, so many worlds waiting to be discovered, not conquered. "I've decided," she told the president. "I'll accept your offer. I'll lead the diplomatic mission." He nodded. "You've earned a new kind of command." She turned one last time to look out at New Hope, rebuilt on the ruins of a graveyard. In the upper atmosphere, barely visible in daylight, the original Vengeance hung in silent orbit, a sword in its sheath. Sinho approached with her itinerary. "Your shuttle to the Explorer departs in 2 hours." Hannah took a deep breath. The war had forged her, but this peace would define her. "We've shown the galaxy our strength," she said quietly. "Now we'll show them our purpose." And with that, Admiral Hannah Lee, the face of Earth's survival, left behind a world she had saved to build the future she had helped create. Peace had never felt like this before. 1 year after the war's end, Earth no longer stood alone. Where once it had been seen as a threat, wild, unpredictable, unworthy of expansion, it now sat at the heart of a new galactic alliance. Not because of its weapons, not even because of its victory, but because of its restraint. Admiral Hannah Lee stood on the observation deck of the Explorer, now orbiting a distant star system few had ever dared to map. Outside the reinforced glass, the light of a pale blue sun shimmered off the sleek hull of the ship that had carried her to this frontier. Not a warship, not a weapon, a vessel of diplomacy. She'd spent the past 6 months traveling between newly freed worlds, helping old enemies rebuild, helping new allies find footing in the galaxy they once feared. From the Tiveran ice colonies to the sentient forests of Eluan, one thing had become clear: the galaxy was watching Earth not for what it could destroy, but for what it could help restore. Behind her, Sinho stepped onto the deck, his ever-present data pad in hand. "Ma'am," he said with a faint smile, "the delegation from the Varashi Collective has arrived. They're docking now." She turned from the viewport. "That's the last one for the summit, right?" "Yes, ma'am. If we stay on schedule, we'll have the agreement finalized in 2 days. 3, tops." Lee nodded. Lee. The Varashi were the last species that had hesitated to join the Concordat. Old fears, old wounds. But the tide had shifted. Humanity's example, their willingness to show mercy, to build rather than dominate, was changing minds. It hadn't been easy. After the war, many had expected Earth to rise as a new empire. Some even feared that was their intention. But Earth hadn't annexed a single planet, hadn't occupied a single capital. Instead, they had rebuilt Nova Terra, restored every colony, paid reparations to species harmed in their retaliation even when no one had asked them to, because it wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about who they chose to be next. Lee stepped into the Explorer's main conference hall an hour later. The room was modest, but elegant polished metals, soft lighting, no weapons in sight. Around the table, representatives from 12 species waited, some physically very different, but all sitting as equals. The Verashi envoy, a tall, fluid being encased in a shimmering exogel, bowed respectfully. "Admiral Lee," it said through its translator, "your reputation precedes you. The stories we heard made us fear you. Now we see. Those stories were incomplete." She offered a polite nod. "Most stories are. That's why we're here to write better ones." Laughter echoed soft, genuine. They spent hours talking. Not about war or strategy, but about trade routes, mutual aid, cultural exchanges. A Verashi poet read a verse about starlight and forgiveness. A human musician responded with an old earth melody on a modified violin. No one would have imagined this 5 years ago. As the evening wound down, Lee returned to her quarters. She kept few personal items, but one she never let go of was the small holo locket she wore tucked inside her uniform. When she activated it, the image shimmered into being her husband, June, and their daughters, smiling in front of a Nova Terra skyline long since turned to ash. "I hope you'd be proud," she whispered. "Not just of what we did, but what we didn't do." A quiet chime interrupted her thoughts. It was Sinhu again. "Admiral," he said, slightly breathless, "we've just received a long-range transmission. It's a small exploration vessel, unidentified species. They're broadcasting in a hybrid dialect, requesting peaceful contact." Lee blinked. "Origin?" "Outside the mapped sectors, deep space. They're requesting a meeting with Concordant leadership." She didn't hesitate. "Send a standard welcome. Begin translation analysis. Prepare for contact." Sinho smiled. "Already on it." She sat for a moment after he left, letting the silence stretch. This was the future they had fought for. Not dominance, but dialogue. Not territory, but trust. The next morning, she stood once more before the counterattack council, this time not as a war leader, but as a builder. A symbol of what came after the fire. President Yang spoke briefly. "When we chose not to strike their cities, many asked why. Today, as we expand this council, as we welcome another new species into our fold, we see the answer: because peace lasts longer than fear ever could." Afterward, Lee joined General Suk, now a senior advisor to the Concordat Defense Division, on the balcony overlooking the Gardens of New Hope. "They're saying your name will be taught in every school in the galaxy," Suk teased. Lee rolled her eye. "Let them teach the names of the engineers, the translators, the ones who helped pick up the pieces. I didn't win the war alone." "No," Suk said, smiling, "but you made sure we didn't lose ourselves in it." In the distance, the Vengeance still hung silently in low orbit, fully armed, always ready. A reminder, not of destruction, but of the choice Earth had made in its darkest hour. To fight, yes, but not to become what they fought. As the stars stretched overhead and the sounds of 1,000 languages echoed across a peaceful city that had once been a graveyard, Admiral Hannah Lee turned her face to the sky. "We prefer peace," she said quietly. "But we will never be unprepared again." And with that, humanity's legacy moved forward not as conquerors, but as keepers of balance, defenders of justice, and ambassadors of something far stronger than fear: hope. They had feared us. Now, they listened. A year after the war, the galaxy no longer looked the same, and it wasn't because of the broken empires or the reformed alliance. It was because something had changed in the way species looked at Earth. At humans. They were no longer the unpredictable deathworlders lurking on the edge of expansion, no longer the rising threat to be managed or culled like livestock. They were something far more difficult to define. A power that had proven it could conquer but chose not to. From the high towers of New Hope to the deepest corners of the Outer Rim, the story had spread. How Earth had built the greatest war fleet in galactic history, shattered the Shirkal military, taken back every lost colony, and then stopped. When they had the chance to flatten cities, they spared them. When vengeance could have turned into genocide, they held the line. And when they stood before their defeated enemies, they offered terms instead of annihilation. It had stunned the galaxy more than the war itself. In the Galactic Concordate's central chamber, high above the surface of Novaterra, leaders from dozens of species had gathered. There was no single cause, no crisis, no emergency, just a question. What does humanity want? Admiral Hannah Lee stood at the podium, flanked by President Yang and Concordat diplomat. She wasn't in uniform today. The warsuit had been retired, her rank now symbolic. She was no longer leading fleets, she was leading the conversation. I've been asked that question 100 times, she began, her voice calm and firm. What do we want? Why didn't we take revenge? Why didn't we flatten the Shirkal capital when we had the chance? She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Because the moment you become the thing you hate, you lose the reason you fought at all. Silence. In one corner, the young Shirkal envoy sat frozen, his expression unreadable. Beside him, a group of former subjugated species watched with cautious hope. Across the room, a delegation from a newly contacted civilization, a species who had hidden from the galaxy for centuries, sat listening intently. We built the Vengeance Fleet to survive, Lee continued. We trained for 3 years in the shadows. We learned how to fight smarter, faster, harder. But that wasn't the hardest thing we did. The hardest part was deciding when the moment came to stop. She took a slow breath, scanning the room. We didn't stop because we were weak. We stopped because we were strong enough to do so. Behind her, a massive hologram shimmered to life scenes of Novaterra before and after the war, burned-out streets replaced by vibrant cities, children laughing where ash once fell, alien communities rebuilding side by side with humans. Not conquest, collaboration, not dominance. Partnership. The images shifted clips of human engineers helping rebuild Tevran infrastructure, of Concordat scientists working with Shirkal biologists to restore poisoned ecosystems, of joint space stations going up in formerly contested zones. The message was clear. Strength had opened the door, but mercy had kept it open. Lee continued. When the Shirkal hit us, they believed they were maintaining order. They thought destruction would keep the peace. They called the slaughter of 3 billion people mercy. She leaned forward slightly. But we've learned something different. Peace doesn't come from domination. It doesn't last when it's built on fear. Peace comes when enemies talk, when old wounds are acknowledged, when power is used to protect, not to rule. There was no applause, no stirring music, just quiet. But it wasn't silence born of disinterest. It was the silence that comes when a truth lands hard, when everyone in the room realizes they're hearing something that will echo beyond them. Later that night, Lee stood alone in the memorial garden. The stars above Novaterra were particularly clear, the air crisp. Wind moved gently through the tall grass and flowering trees, many of them genetically restored from species once thought extinct. The garden had been expanded in recent months now, including memorials not just for the lost human colonies, but for the species that had perished in other Shirkal cleansings. She walked slowly along the curved path, stopping at the statue of the first contact circle, a human child and a crystalline Tevran sitting side by side, legs swinging off a ledge, staring up at a model galaxy. Sinho approached quietly. The new signatories have issued a statement, he said. They call Earth the stabilizing force of the new galactic era. Lee smiled faintly. Not bad for a species they once labeled dangerous. Sinho held out a small comm device. You've been asked to make one last broadcast. Not to leaders, to citizens. All of them. She hesitated. Live? Live? He confirmed. Across the Concordat. Across the frontier. Even the sure call homeworld. Lee looked at the device for a long moment, then took it. She walked up the steps to the small broadcast podium overlooking the garden, placed the device in the cradle, and began to speak. To every citizen of every world, this message isn't from a politician. It's from a soldier, from someone who's seen what hatred can do, what vengeance can cause. We were attacked, we were nearly erased, and we struck back not to destroy, but to survive. And when we had the power to turn the galaxy red, we chose something harder. We chose to stop. We don't ask you to forget the past. We ask you to help shape the future. Humanity will not rule the stars. We don't want to, but we will never again bow to those who try. We've earned our place not through force, but through the strength to offer mercy when no one expected it. Remember that. And if someday you face the same choice we did, remember what it means to be more than your anger. The transmission ended. No music, no fanfare, no fanfare. Just words. And across 1,000 systems, billions of beings, young and old, alien and human, heard something they'd never been told before by anyone with power. That mercy is not weakness. That survival is not the end of the story. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose not to strike. Some things are retired, they're remembered. Above the planet, Nova Terra rebuilt, reborn, and thriving, a single silhouette remained in orbit, silent but ever present. The Vengeance, fully armed, fully operational, and alone. Every other warship from Operation Vengeance had been decommissioned, dismantled, stripped for parts, or repurposed for science and exploration. It had been the Concordate's directive: no more weapons of mass retaliation, no more reminders of war. But not this one. The original Vengeance-class flagship stayed. It wasn't a loophole. It was a decision, deliberate, unanimous, and symbolic. The Vengeance had earned its place not as a relic, but as a warning, not to others, to humanity itself. From the surface, children in the streets of New Hope sometimes asked about the gleaming dot in the sky. Was it a satellite? A station? A museum? Their parents would smile and say quietly, "That's the ship that made the galaxy listen." Inside the Galactic Concordat headquarters, high above the city, Admiral Hannah Lee met with President Yang in a quiet chamber of polished stone and glass. The room wasn't marked by medals or battle flags. Only a single plaque near the window bore a name. "In memory of those we lost. In honor of what we chose." Yang poured them both a cup of tea. "They're still asking about it," he said, nodding toward the orbital path of the Vengeance projected on the wall. "Delegates, journalists, historians." Lee gave a faint smile. "Let them ask. We didn't keep it for them." He studied her face, older now, lined not just from age but from the weight of memory. "Do you ever wonder if it was the right decision? To keep it intact?" She looked down into her tea for a long moment before answering. "No, that ship saved us. It's part of us now. A monument we can't build out of stone." She didn't say what else it was. A grave, a reminder, a silent vigil for the family she'd lost, the cities she couldn't save, the billions whose names would never appear in any treaty. Later that day, Hannah visited the launch platform for the new Concordat Explorer fleet. Sleek ships painted in diplomatic colors, bearing insignias from multiple species. Their mission: discovery, peace, rebuilding. She stood alone near the platform as one ship lifted into orbit, engines humming in gentle tones. She didn't flinch. Her body remembered the thunder of war engines, but this was different. It was the sound of moving forward. Sinho approached quietly. "The next generation's leaving the nest," he said, watching the ship fade into the clouds. "Good," she said. "They should fly farther than we ever did, and never need what we built." He hesitated, then handed her a data slate. "This came in from Engineering Command. They're asking about the final status of the Vengeance, whether it should be maintained or mothballed." She didn't even look at the screen. "Maintain it, quietly. No public tours, no ceremonies. It's still combat ready," he reminded her. I know, she said. That's the point. That evening, she boarded a private shuttle and took a silent ride into orbit. It wasn't her first time back aboard the Vengeance, but every return felt different. The interior hadn't changed. Dark corridors lined with reinforced bulkheads. Bridge consoles still programmed with the original interface. Some lights flickered, others glowed steady. It had been maintained with care by a skeleton crew, rotated quarterly, all volunteers. As she stepped onto the bridge, her footsteps echoed. The command chair was still there. Untouched. She didn't sit. Instead, she walked to the forward viewing pane and stared down at Novaterra below. New Hope glowed faintly on the dark side of the planet. Thousands of lights, families, children, life. Status report, she said aloud out of habit. A voice answered. Not AI human. Lieutenant Day, now promoted to commander, stepped into the room. He'd been part of her original crew. Younger back then, less scarred. Systems green, he said. Power stable. Weapons dormant per order. Hull integrity at 99%. No anomalies. She nodded. You've kept her in good shape. Day hesitated. Admiral, permission to speak freely. She turned. Always. Do you think we'll need her again? Lee looked out at the stars. So many of them were peaceful now. Systems that once feared the Shurkal now sent ambassadors and artists. Concordant envoys traveled freely, shared science, shared dreams. But not all corners of the galaxy had changed. I hope not, she said. But we live in a galaxy where hope doesn't always get the final word. Day said nothing more. He understood. As she prepared to return to her shuttle, she paused by the main console and reached into her coat. From the inner pocket, she removed a small metal token, worn, old, etched with the names of her husband and daughters. She placed it in the center of the console. Hold this for me, she whispered, and then she left. Back on Earth, a new generation learned about the war in schools, studied its causes, its battles, and its choices. But it was the final lesson that always struck the deepest chord. We won not just because we were strong, but because we knew when to stop. The Vengeance remained in silent orbit. It didn't patrol, it didn't threaten. It simply existed like a legend that chose not to fade. Every diplomat who stepped into the Concordat chamber could see it from the tower's highest windows. Every leader who debated peace or aggression remembered that the ship still waited. And every child who asked what it was told the truth. That's not a weapon. That's a promise.